The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar on uncovering the examiner's comments, particularly around financial reporting. My name is Alexander Leach and I work in the education team for the ACCA in the Middle East. Just before we get started and go through this wonderful presentation and then the webinar today, just a little bit of housekeeping. We are running this live on the GoToWebinar platform, but we also are running this as a recording as well. So you may be watching this back. If you're watching it live and you have any intermittent issues in terms of connectivity, just refresh, come back into the platform, follow the link, and away we go again. As we do go along, I would absolutely love it if you would engage with me, ask me questions, throw in some questions as we go along, because sometimes you don't always want to save them to the end. It's always nice to engage with the audience. So please do throw questions in as we go along. I will try and save some time towards the back end of the presentation. We're going to be going for around an hour. We normally overrun on these if you've been on these before, so I'll try and keep it to time, but also I'll try and save around 10 minutes. But as I say, don't worry too much if I do overrun, it's not a problem. If you are watching this back, our contact details will be provided at the end of the webinar. So if you want to reach out to us, you can do so via our social medias or direct contact details that I'll share with you later. So just before we get stuck into the actual meat of the presentation and go through the examiner's reports, I'll talk a little bit about myself. Now, unfortunately, I don't have the full hour to talk about myself, but I could easily do that. As I say, my name is Alexander Leach. If you want to connect with me, please feel free to do so on LinkedIn. You can also reach out to us at our direct email address again, which I'll share with you later. I am an ACCA member. I'm actually going to be a fellow of the ACCA as of next month, which I'm very much looking forward to. I also have taught the ACCA qualification as well as many other accountancy qualifications for many years when I worked for Kaplan Financial, and I actually studied my ACCA through virtue of PwC. So I was very fortunate to work for PwC for many years, actually in the accountancy services practice, which is brilliant because it's very appropriate to what we're doing today, because I was a financial reporter, a financial accountant, so I have lots of first-hand experience about what we're going to be talking about, particularly in this exam. Please do reach out to me if you do need anything. We are always, as a team, very much there to help you as our students and stakeholders. So what are we talking about specifically? Well, we're going to get to know the financial reporting exam. I'm going to talk a little bit about a study approach that we devised throughout the education team, and we try and talk about in a three-phased approach. We're going to give you a few tips to get started, because I appreciate that many of you will be at different stages within your ACCA study journey. Many of you will be looking to start studying now for September exam. Many of you will already have been studying previously for maybe the June or March sitting, and due to the intermittent COVID-19 issues and the exam problems that's caused, you're now aiming for a September sitting, which is fantastic. Some of you might be looking towards the December sitting or even March next year. So I'll give you some tips on how to get started. Then I'll dive into the examiner's comments. That'll be where we spend quite a lot of the meat of this session. I'll give you some general tips and comments, as well as a few summaries as we go along, and a couple of examples of objective test questions. And then I'll try and save some time for questions and answers. I like to be, as you can probably tell, quite informal, quite jovial, quite approachable. So hopefully we can have a relaxed session. But as I say, if you have any questions, please do just fire them in. So financial reporting, what's it all about? Well, it's a great exam. It's one of the most fundamental accounting exams. It's actually just after the applied knowledge level. It's within the applied skills level of the qualification. It provides the skills to understand accounting standards, conceptual frameworks in the preparation of financial statements, and how to analyze and interpret those financial statements. It's a true accountancy paper, to be honest with you. Here's an overview of the syllabus, and we'll talk through the syllabus in a little bit more detail, but the conceptual and regulatory frameworks for financial reporting underpins the other sections. And I love this little flow diagram as it moves across. So we've got accounting for transactions in financial statements, preparation of single entity financial statements, preparation of consolidated financial statements, so groups, associates, subsidiaries. And again, they all flow into the analysis and interpretation of financial statements, because what we are trying to create within this qualification, and what you are trying to show potential employers by having this qualification, is that you can actually analyze financial statements and be able to talk about them in a constructive and decision-making criteria way. So it's brilliant to be able to do your debits and credits, and that's that's, you know, a fundamental underpinning principle of being an accountant. But beyond that, our higher level skills are now being able to analyse and interpret the preparation and what they mean. And that's how this exam evolves with section A, B, and C. And we'll talk a little bit about that as we go along. This exam is a standalone exam in itself, but it's probably the most far-reaching exam of the entire qualification, or at least one of. You can see that the prerequisite for this exam was financial accounting. So that's in the applied knowledge level. It used to be sort of F1, 2, 3. Well, financial accounting now feeds into financial reporting, and it is assumed that you will have retained the knowledge from that exam to then use it to develop your knowledge within financial reporting. What's also really interesting is that within the same level, so within the applied skills level, we've got corporate and business law and then audit and assurance. And they also interact as two papers that link into financial reporting. So corporate law, you would learn about separate entities, partnerships, the advantages and disadvantages of being a separate legal entity, so a limited company, a PLC, shares, and so on and so forth. And they also show up again within financial reporting, because it's important that if you are looking to prepare financial accounts, you understand what the nature of them is and what entity or individual or partnership or group it actually relates to. And then the overflow into audit and assurance, because audit and assurance is another fantastic exam that tries to build on and show knowledge that you can actually audit and perform assurance engagements, so financial audits, on the financial reporting standards. So if you're going to be studying the international accounting standards in financial reporting, you will then be learning and showing that you have learned how to audit them in audit and assurance. So there's quite a lot of overlap within that one layer of the qualification. As you step up to the strategic professional level, you have strategic business reporting and also just off to the sort of side, strategic business leader. Now I'll talk a little bit about SBR to start with. So if you were to follow that in a sort of middle pillar, you can see that financial accounting leads into financial reporting, but then financial reporting feeds into strategic business reporting. And that's another great example of where you need to retain knowledge throughout the qualification. Now, many students potentially come through with exemptions, and one of the ultimate risks of exemptions is that you may or may not have retained enough knowledge to then move on to the higher level. So if you are a student with exemptions, maybe you're exempt from financial accounting, I would massively advocate scrubbing up, for a colloquial term, on a lot of your knowledge on on financial accounting, so groups, associates, debits and credits, and different international accounting standards before you get stuck into the financial reporting exam. And even when you pass this exam, which I'm sure you will, you still need to retain the knowledge on financial reporting because it directly feeds into SBR. Now, I could talk about SBR for a long time, but just to give you a short overview, it's a high-level strategic professional paper that tries to develop and ensure that you can think about financial accounting and financial reporting from a strategic level within a directors giving advice, throwing in quite a lot of ethical standards in there as well. And rather than doing a lot of transactions, you're giving more advice on the implications of international accounting standards, on the performance of business, and you also have some professional marks in there as well. I also specialize quite heavily in strategic business leader. It's actually one of, and I said favorite a few times, probably one of my favorite exams. And I really like it because it's a catch-all exam. So it's an essential exam that you do at your strategic professional level. And financial reporting directly relates into this exam by means of having to understand ratios, perform financial analysis, be able to understand that your financial analysis then needs commentary, and therefore, again, FR fundamentally underpins quite a significant amount of the exam routes for the qualification. So I will move on now, and I'll talk specifically a little bit more about the syllabus. So here we go. On completion of this exam, candidates should be able to discuss and apply a conceptual and regulatory framework for financial reporting, account for transactions in accordance to the international accounting standards, or we talk a little bit about the ISs later in this presentation, analyze and interpret financial statements, and then prepare and present financial statements for single entities and business combinations in accordance with the IAS. So this diagram likes to illustrate how the flow of information and the main capabilities of the syllabus should be used in aiding and planning your teaching and learning in a way that is structured. And this leads us really nicely into the exam itself. So it's a three-part exam. Section A, B, and C. Section A is a really nice way to start. So there's 30 marks available. The exam itself is 3 hours and 15 minutes, and I'll talk about timings as we go along, but ultimately you want to try and stick to about 1.8 minutes per mark, with a little bit of buffer thrown in there because of that extra 15 minutes that I'll sort of allude to very shortly. Section A, great part of the exam. Starts, warms up, objective test questioning, could be drag and drops, ABCDs, true or false. Select two is often something that they try to get you to do. So I'll show you a couple of those from the examiner's report. So each worth 2 marks, but some of them you can do very quickly, and some of them because of the knowledge that you've retained through your learning, but some of them you might need to spend a little bit more time on, do some calculations. Section B, again, 30 marks, but these are 3 objective test cases. So they provide a little bit more detail, and then you have 5 separate 2 markers underneath this little case, and I believe you have 3 of these, so 30 marks in total as well. And then section C is 40 marks, so the larger part of this actual exam, and 2 scenario related, 1 or more requirements. And this is where you have to maybe do some preparation, and we'll talk again, you might have to do a cash flow, financial statement, statement of comprehensive income, statement of change in equity, and all the lovely different financial statements that you learn throughout this exam in itself. So how to approach a study, and we'll talk about where to get started just after this. Plan, prepare, and pass. And I won't take credit for this. It's something that the team within the education team in the Middle East devised. I think it's a really effective 3 Ps approach. So you want to plan. Prior planning prevents poor performance is something that I've often resonated to many of my students. You want to get to know your exam, find an appropriate study support. So you might want to get an approved learning partner, buy some content online, use an online learning partner, whatever you want to do. And we'll talk about different options with learning partners later, and we'll talk about how fantastic they are within the region and the support that's available freely and also through the learning partners as well. You want to draw up a study plan. You can find that on the ACCA Study Support Resource website, where you can lay out. I think we're about 6 weeks up to the September exam now. It's also exam entry deadline day to day, so make sure you have enrolled for your exam or your exams if you're going to be doing them in September, and you can plan out your study as well. You want to prepare. We call this the learning phase. We also have the revision phase, so we split it into sort of 2 parts. Gain the knowledge that you need, learn how to apply the knowledge. So that might be going through a study text, an integrated workbook, doing online lectures, going into class, which is fantastic. And then the revision phase, which is all about the practice. Make sure you can learn things, particular elements of the syllabus, and then see how they're examined through question practice. Make sure that you do a lot of question practice tests, specimens, and quizzes. There's plenty out there. And then ultimately the last phase, pass. Do mock exams and practice tests to time in exam standards to ensure that you can clearly understand the knowledge and how it's applied. Make sure that you manage your time effectively. And the last part, and we talked about this a little bit yesterday when I was doing a similar thing for tax, is about relaxing. And now I completely empathize with the fact that this is a stressful environment. I've done these exams myself, and I've taught, well, maybe even thousands of students who've also done these exams. And one of the biggest barriers is not actually your ability to retain and learn knowledge. It can be the stress that comes as a result of studying in an exam that's, quite a stressful environment. It is stressful. It's not relaxing. Now, one way you could try and deal with this is to come up with relaxation techniques. We've got a well-being hub on our ACCA website that will be able to help you, as well as an ACCA student community where you can learn from other people how they've dealt with the stress. Ultimately, planning and preparation really help to relax you, but if you do get to the exam, just one simple technique that I've employed and I've asked students to do, and I know it works, is something called box breathing, where you breathe in for 4, hold, breathe out for 4, and do that a few times over just to try and relax and then get stuck into your exam. So where to start? Well, many people, will tell you, start with the syllabus, but I actually think starting with the exam is a good place to actually get set up, because that's the ultimate objective. You're starting with the means in mind. So get an exam, go onto our website, get a past exam, get a specimen if you also want to have a look at them, and get used to the way in which the ACCA ask exams or ask questions and requirements. Get used to the structure. You also want to review the examining team guidance, because that is written for you as students by the people who write the exam. So it's a bit like from the horse's mouth, and it's really good because ultimately you are learning what other students have done or not done so well, and you won't make the same mistakes as them, or maybe you'll do some of the brilliant things that they've done previously. And it's this thing here that we're going to be talking quite a lot about, the examiner's report today. But yeah, make sure you read these. Make sure you read the last 4, 5, 6 of them, because there's patterns that emerge as you go along as well. Review the key themes in the examiner's reports, as I just said. Review the syllabus and study guides, as well as the examinable documents. Review support and videos. Lots of videos online, plenty on the ACCA website, plenty on our Middle East ACCA YouTube channel. Also, we've got our Instagram, we've got our LinkedIn, we've got our Facebook. Myself and the education team, as well as some expert tutors from all around the world, have got a host of free resources for you as students. And also review the exam technique and syllabus update articles. And I'll talk a little bit about articles later on. Just before I get stuck into the examiner's comments, I'm just going to see if any questions have come in, because I do appreciate that there's also natural pauses as we go along. So if you do have any questions, please just pop them in the Q&A box. I'll do my best to review them. I can see the chat's gone live as well, which is fantastic. And we've got some really useful links within there. So if you haven't already had a look at the chat, we've got guides in there. So FR guidance, we've got the study support resources, syllabus. So please go in there, grab the links, pop them into your browser and check them out and save them in your favorites. Any questions going on so far? Brilliant. So a few questions in there already. I'll save a few of them towards the end because I can sort of group them together. But as I say, if you do have any questions, please just ask. So examiner's comments. If you've not looked at one of these before, and there's quite a few, make sure you do, because they're brilliant. I mean, I, as a tutor, found these very effective as a way to get students to focus on, you know, key areas that they were struggling with and other students are struggling with, because you can learn from the examiner's comments on what other students have not done so well. I'm going to spend a little bit of time now talking through each section of the examiner's report. I'm going to actually go through a couple of the questions that are freely available in the examiner's report, and I'm going to debrief them in a way that I would talk about your exam technique and exam approach. They are freely available. The examiner's reports are an essential study resource. If you haven't looked at these before, please do. The FR exam is computer-based exam, as many of you will know, and therefore it is not the same exam as the person who maybe even sat next to you or in the same room or even in the same exam centre, or maybe if you're doing it at home, it's a different exam per person. Now, it's the same standard, but ultimately you will not get the exact same questions. Here I will highlight some strengths, weaknesses in candidates' performance, and I'm taking my comments particularly from the March examiner's report, but it would be well worth you looking at December's as well as September's and June's from last year as well. So section A, I'm going to look at two questions that candidates found particularly difficult. One of them is actually on intangible assets and the other one's on investments in associates, so I'll talk about that in a minute. But that's just to remind you, 15 objective test questions worth 2 marks. And you want to be spending somewhere in the region of around 54 minutes max, with a little bit of buffer in there as well, but around 50 minutes on this section, and make sure you keep moving through the exam. The brilliant thing about the computer-based exams and the software that you use is you can flag questions. So I, as a tutor, you know, sometimes will tell students, do you know what, flag that question because you can come back to it later, and that's a really good effective way and one of the advantages of computer-based exams. So here's the first example, and this example actually is on intangible assets. It talks about International Accounting Standard 38 for those who are interested. And the first thing you want to do is actually, oh, there we go, is indicate which of the following that you want to sort of do a bit of a drag and drop on. So if I just go through and have a look at the question itself, bear with me 1 second. Yeah, there we go. So the criteria for intangible assets, it's important to note that the 4 options must be correct. Many students actually would have selected 2 or 3, got them right, but if they get one of them wrong, they get no marks, just to sort of clarify that. If you even get just one of the 4 options, you get 0 marks. You've got to get all of them right. So how do we go about getting the correct answer? Well, indicate which of the options below should be recognized as an intangible asset by dragging and dropping the appropriate options into the grey boxes. And you've got 8 options and you've got 4 open boxes. Now here, you want to understand as a sort of basis what an intangible asset is. Well, it's something you can't touch ultimately. It's a non-physical asset. Very much unlike a physical asset, so a tangible asset like this laptop I'm holding on and wobbling at the minute, or a computer or a car. It's actually quite an interesting concept. You know, intangible assets can either be purchased, which is relatively straightforward, or internally generated, where it gets a little bit more complicated, and we look at things like research and development. Now, the general rule under International Accounting Standard 38 is that if development expenditure meets certain criteria, it can be capitalized, but mostly research expenditure is often expensed to the profit and loss or income statement, depending on what you want to call it at that moment in time. So here we go. First one, that is correct. 3 million paid to acquire the brand name of Fast Design. It meets the definition of an intangible asset. 3 million spent on the license to operate a production facility for 6 years. This license meets the definition of an intangible asset. 1 million spent on the construction of the product prototype before it's launched. This meets the definition of development expenditure and therefore can be capitalized as an intangible asset. And then purchase of goodwill. So 2 million paid as goodwill for acquiring Unique Co. This meets the definition of an intangible asset. So those are your 4 correct answers. So then that obviously means that these are your incorrect answers. So the first one, brand name developed by New Designs Co. worth 10 million. Well, this is an internal development and therefore capitalization is prohibited. 2 million spent on advertising campaigns expected to increase revenue. Well, that just sounds like revenue expenditure to me. The expenditure cannot be controlled, therefore does not meet the definition of an asset. 2.5 million spent on new equipment to develop the successful product. This is a tangible asset by the sounds of it, not an intangible asset, so therefore isn't an intangible asset. And 1.5 million spent on training customer service staff expected to increase revenue by 5 million. This is by all means revenue expenditure. It should go through the profit and loss. It's not an intangible asset. Moving quite nicely into example 2. This here looks at International Accounting Standard 28, investments in associates. So you want to start by looking at the requirement itself. Calculate the carrying amount. So you're going to have to do some calculations here. So writing up a pro forma would be necessary. Calculate the carrying amount of an investment in Branch Co. in the consolidated statements of the financial position of Root Co. as at the 31st December 2007. So let's take a look and pull out some key information. Root Co. acquired 30% of 100,000 equity shares in Branch Co. at $7.50 per share at the beginning of the year. So that is at the 1st of January 2007. It's really important to pull out the dates as well, because that will obviously help you with the timings of profits that you're going to be, or even the costs that are associated with an associate. There's a nice pun. That are related directly to the attribution and the value of an associate. When Branch Co. had retained earnings of $460,000 and a balance on the revaluation surplus of 50 grand. All right, well, at the end of the year, so that's the end of 2007, Branch Co. had retained earnings that had actually decreased by the looks of it to $370,000 and a balance of 70 grand on the revaluation surplus. So the revaluation had gone up by 20. Root Co., so you had considered its investment in Branch Co. had been sufficiently or suffered an impairment of 40,000. Now that's all your impairment. Now one of the key things when you're dealing with associates is to attribute how much you earn of an organization. So you earn 30%, and that's a key thing there. You also want to consider the investment and the overall value of that investment. So that would be, you know, the 100,000 equity shares at £7.50. We don't necessarily need to worry about the years, but you do want to consider the change in retained earnings as well as the change in surplus, and in addition to the impairment loss. So what does this test? Well, this tests actually learning outcome 2D, but don't worry particularly about what that fits into the syllabus. This question tests your understanding of how to account for an investment in an associate company. So the equity accounting and the carrying amount is the cost plus or minus the movement in post-acquisition reserves, minus the dividends. Now, there's nothing about dividends in this question, so you don't need to worry about that, but there is an impairment. If you look correctly, there's a $40,000 impairment. So if I were you, I'd be having a little bit of a sort of calculation now. And while you do that, in fact, yeah, why not have a go? I'm going to just have a look and see what questions are coming in, and then I'll debrief it with the answer in itself. So I'll just have a look at the questions because I see a few things popping in, which is absolutely fantastic. Brilliant. Well, thank you ever so much for the feedback, and by all means, that we talk a little bit about where you can find more questions, and I'll also, make sure if I am going a little too fast, I'll slow down, which is absolutely fine. I've got plenty of time, so I do appreciate everyone's feedback. Keep it coming in as well. It's more than welcome. It makes me realise that I'm not just talking to myself. It's fantastic that you're engaging, so do keep going. So if you've had a go at this, we are taking the costs, the movement in post-acquisition reserves, the dividends received, and then the impairment. Now, there is no dividends, so we just get the carrying amount. It works out a little bit like this. Cost of the investment is 30,000 at 7.5. So you've bought 30% of the 100,000 shares. So that comes out at 225,000. Post-acquisition loss in retained earnings, you only want to account for 30% of that loss. So that comes out to 27,000. But what's interesting is that your revaluation reserve has increased. That's increased by 20,000. You only take 30% of this, so that's an addition of 6,000. But you take the full impairment of 40 grand, which leaves you with a carrying amount of 164,000. Why are the other answers not correct? Well, actually, there wasn't in this an option to do drag and drop A, B, C, D. This was a fill in the blank question. So you had to type the number in, which is very, very popular in the OT questions for all exams. Some treated the post-acquisition loss in retained earnings as a gain, so they probably got it the wrong way around. So if we just flip back to that 27 grand, they might have calculated it, but not treat it as a minus, which would have been really poor because you were clever enough to realise that you just needed your 30% of it, but you just put it the wrong way around. Also, some people wrote off 30% of the impairment, but it's your impairment in your investment, so you take the full 40,000 of that. This suggests that candidates either not comfortable with equity accounting or a little careless at workings. And I'd actually say from my experience, it tends to be a bit of a balance. Many students might not learn, the pro forma for this, so they might not understand the equity accounting pro forma here, or they might know it, but then they just get their additions and subtractions the wrong way around, which is a big shame because unfortunately you get 0 marks as a result of that. So please do be careful. Take the time you need to do this. The advice from the examiner: candidates should take care to fill in the blank questions and really review the answer thoroughly before moving to the next question. Brilliant. So I think that's the end of that particular debrief, and I'll just see if there's anything else popped up. There we go. Yeah, good stuff. Again, I'll save those questions towards the end. So we're about halfway through now. Got another half an hour to go. We've still got plenty more to debrief, so just keep sticking the questions in the question panel. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about section B. So section B tests candidates' knowledge on a number of topics in more detail than section A. There are 3 case questions containing 5-mark objective test questions, and the range of topics in the March 2020 exam was accounting policies, financial instruments, plant, property and equipment, so PPE, borrowing costs and government grants, as well as leases, foreign exchange, and then revenue, and probably revenue recognition. Candidates should have found the following accounting adjustments difficult. So the revaluation of a property is something that candidates struggled with. Government grants as well, which is interesting. Costs associated with the construction of PPE, in particular borrowing costs, and the calculation of a carrying amount of a right of use lease asset. Now, the examiner and myself, as well, we do admit that it's, some technically challenging areas of this exam, but there are also some relatively straightforward parts as well. And I think, being coming from this background, coming from a financial accounting background, I can appreciate that you should really try and get the easy marks a lot first. So, make sure you've got the basics nailed down, and then take note of these areas. So such as revaluation of property, government grants, costs of construction, and the right of use of a lease asset. Make sure you learn and scrub up on them, because the examiner's telling you where they went wrong last time. So what better way to actually probably try and figure out, well, they might ask them again. And if students generally struggle with these areas, you don't want to be one of them, because here is an area that you can improve on as a result of other people giving you a bit of an inside track, really. Candidates should prepare for a balanced financial reporting exam, which will contain challenging questions in addition to questions that are less challenging. So there'll be a balanced exam with different levels of questions, different difficulties of questions. A few points, and I like these sort of 3 points here. Read the case scenario and requirement very carefully. Cover the whole syllabus and be able to apply your knowledge and theories and techniques to the scenario provided. As in the OT case questions, there are always areas that will offer examinable. Sorry, again, as in the OT case questions, these areas will often be examined in the context of a case. So you've got to get used to, and the best way to do that is just to do lots of practice. And I'll tell you again where to find more practice questions beyond our actual amazing resources on the ACCA website. So into section C, and I think, you know, this is the bigger part of the exam. It's often the part of the exam that many students get a little bit, I don't want to say anxious about, because there's not really a need to get anxious about this in particular, but they often see it as quite a challenge because it's the bigger part. But given the structure of it, you can pass your exam there or thereabouts if you do a really good job on this. Now, not saying you can't mathematically pass it without this, but it's a lot harder to. You need to get to the section C. You need to have a really good go at these 2 scenario questions. Candidates were presented with questions drawn mainly on areas of single entity accounting preparation, analysis of the single entity financial statements, preparation of consolidated financial statements, and the analysis of said consolidated financial statements. Now I'm going to talk through each one of these in a little bit more detail, but just before I do, let's, you know, really take a nice sort of step back and think about this. You've done 2 sections already. You've worked through your exam. You're probably about just a little under 2 hours through. You want to save around 1 hour and 15 for section C because, you know, it's the largest part of the exam. From my experience, many students don't do that. They get hung up on questions in section A, section B. They don't use the flag function effectively enough, and then they end up, you know, stalling. If you are going through these questions in section A and B, before you get to section C, if you are overrunning in time, flag the questions and save the 10 minutes towards the end, you know, a little bit of a buffer, and then you can come back and have an educated guess at them. But it's much more effective time management to have a go at section C. So make sure you don't just leave this and rush it because it's so important. Single entity accounting preparation. So you could be asked to prepare a statement of profit and loss. So there's a few acronyms in here. Anybody who's relatively new to accounting, I remember when I joined, you know, PwC and started doing my ACCA here, I was amazed by the wondrous amount of endless acronyms. So I will do my utmost to explain these and expand on these. And then in a few years' time, you'll be talking in different letters yourself. It's quite amusing actually when you start talking to individuals and talking about SOCIs and SCFs and TBs and can you pass me the SOPL and things like that. So it does become second nature. For many of you in the region, particularly across the Middle East, you know, English isn't necessarily your first language, and we do appreciate that, and there is support for you out there, and I'll talk about that shortly. But learning the accounting language is also something that you need to do to be effective within this qualification. So you might be asked to prepare a statement of profit and loss or a statement of other comprehensive income. You might be asked to prepare a SOCI, so statement of changes in equity, extracts from a statement of cash flow, using a trial balance and notes that require adjustments. So you could be asked to prepare different financial statements, and the comments and the common mistakes by the examiner, so particularly in relation to a profit and loss, but you can see a bit of a pattern emerging. So we've got investments in statement of profit and loss, ignoring instructions from the examiner and incorrecting accounting or treatment. You can see also within the statement of change in equity, this was often not attempted at all and was largely incompleted and missing opening balances. So a few easy things to pick up there. A statement of change in equity shows you ultimately a reconciliation of your retained earnings and a few other bits in there. So if you are asked to do an extract or prepare a statement of change in equity, get the opening balances in there because they'll be given to you in last year's financial statements. You just roll them forward, pop them at the top, and then you can do your adjustments maybe for revaluations and changes in profit and loss. If you've not attempted it, this could be because you've ignored it when you've learnt about it or where you should have learnt about it, which is quite typical of many students. They learn a lot about a profit and loss account. They get stressed about a cash flow. They learn a lot about, you know, financial positions, but then they're like, oh, well, I'll just, you know, ignore statement change equity. I'm not sure really what it is, but actually it's a really straightforward financial statement. It's just showing you, as I say, a reconciliation of retained earnings. So within this here, you want to try and attempt it. Put the opening balances in. You can do some really simple adjustments, revaluation reserves go through there, changes in share premiums, share capital accounts, rights issues of shares, and obviously the profit and loss. Cash flows omitted by a significant number of candidates. If I had a dirham for every time a student said to me, I really don't like cash flows, and then I sat with them and said, why not? Because it's just the same as having a bank account, really. That's all it is. And I think, trying to get you to understand that a cash flow is actually probably one of the most pragmatic and logical financial statements there is, because it's not got any wonderful and, strange concepts in there like accruals and prepayments and financial instruments. It's just cash movements. So if you think about a statement of cash flow, and again, I'm at risk of overrunning on this, but think about it like a bank account. We've got money coming in when you are paid, and you've got money going out when you buy things like assets, cars, food. So think about a statement of cash flow like that. If you can try and get your head around it in that way, it becomes very much a second nature. Think about your pocket, your purse, or your wallet. In general, in the absence of workings, it's impossible for a marker to give credit, and the earned figure rule cannot be applied. It often stresses me to some extent, and maddens me in a lighter sense, that students omit things which is clear that they're doing this within section C, ignoring instructions, not attempting questions, because you're not going to score any marks if you miss things out. It's very simple, and you immediately go from having 100 marks available to, oh well, maybe now 80, and then maybe now 70, and then all of a sudden it's a lot harder to get 50 out of 70 than it is to get 50 out of 100. And remember, 50 is the pass mark, that's the goal. So don't do yourself a disservice by missing things out. And therefore, take the examiner's advice and scrub up on investments within profit and loss accounts, statement of change in equity, and statements of cash flow. Analysis of individual company financial statements. So some common mistakes included not using profits before interest and tax when using or when calculating capital employed, or actually not doing the calculation correctly. It's interesting this, because as a concept, capital employed is often one of the most talked about profitability measures, and you should really understand quite a considerable amount of ratios when you come to this exam, because you're taking a higher level than you were in financial accounting. You're now creating financial statements and extracts, but then having to analyze them, and to analyze them you need to understand ratios. So here we go. What else does the examiner say? They say they should read the question carefully and provide the calculations being asked for. I find that interesting, because sometimes students, and I've seen this myself, will do the calculations they want to come up. So they've maybe learned quite a lot about gearing, and they'll be like, oh, I'll just do a gearing requirement. But if it's not asked about risk or anything like that, well, why do it? If it's asking about profitability or liquidity, use the appropriate ratios. And the final point to note, that ratio calculations is perhaps one of the most important. Candidates must ensure that they are showing their workings. I'm going to be completely transparent with you. When I'm doing my presentations now, even I'm putting down notes, doing some of my workings, making sure that I can actually talk through, and I've got some cues. So when you're doing your exam, make sure you're taking notes, because the workings are needed. You can do them in the Excel, or it's not Excel, in the spreadsheet that you've got there on the exam software, and you can do plenty of practice of that, because if you don't show your workings, you're probably not going to score as many marks either. Generic comments are often a problem within the section C of the financial reporting exam. We have, a 17% return on capital employed, full stop. So what? What does that mean? That means nothing to me. 17% could be fantastic. It could be poor. Is it, decent compared to last year? How does it compare to a competitor? Without the comment, without that so what, you're just putting a number in a spreadsheet, and computers can do that for us. The real value add now to us being humans is that ability to communicate effectively as to what these numbers mean, to allow people and ourselves to make informed decisions. We also want to use headings and small paragraphs. Candidates will provide better structure to their answers if they do this. And guess what? If you structure your answer with headings, small paragraphs, subsections, you're going to score more marks because it's a lot easier for us as markers to actually allocate the marks to this. It's, you know, it sounds common sense to me, but here's some really, you know, really nice, easy advice for exam technique. Structure your answer with headings, short, punchy paragraphs explaining why the number and what it means, and you're going to pick up plenty of marks in section C. Preparation of consolidated financial statements, so the preparation of consolidated profit and loss and some other comprehensive income. So common mistakes here include a mid-year acquisition of a subsidiary. Time and time again, students won't pay attention to the dates that are given in the requirement or in the scenario, and they'll put a full year's worth of consolidation of profit within there, when actually they only really need to do 6 months or 3 months or 9 months. It tends to be on average quarterly, but that's not always the case. But just bear that in mind. You do want to prorata some of the profit and loss and some of the subsidiaries. Failure to split the consolidated profit and loss year between the amount attributed to the shareholder of the parent and the amount attributable to the non-controlling interests as well. Non-group accounting adjustments, and then also of the main errors related to the share of associated profits. So again, do pay attention to the dates, scrub up on non-group accounting adjustments, and make sure that it's either a subsidiary or an associate. And you might remember, if you have or haven't studied this, and if you're about to, the ways in which you can do the common workings for consolidations and group accounts. Analysis, that's a new word. Analysis of consolidated financial statements. So complete a small calculation of part A before calculating a number of ratios and analysing the performance or position of a company. Common mistakes include goodwill, and I've paused there because it's again something that I see time and time again. Goodwill is a very interesting concept as a, you know, something to recognise in your financial statements. Make sure that you read the examiner's articles on goodwill, and we'll talk about it very shortly, because it's an exceptional resource for you to understand how the examiner would like you as students to understand goodwill as a concept and how it's accounted for within consolidated financial statements. Also, you need to understand group disposals. So when you are, you know, disposing of selling a part of a business, how that affects your overall group. Ratios, lots of students, I've touched on this, so I won't spend much time on that, but understand your key ratios, learn them. In fact, you know, this is a general piece of advice that I give many students. When I was a student myself, and also, you know, when I've taught these exams, I actively stress the use of compounding information. So get a little sheet of paper, maybe something like this, and write down the ratios under the key headings, you know, profitability, liquidity, efficiency, and so risk, you know, and so on and so forth, investor ratios, and have maybe a spider diagram for the ratios, have a, you know, a mind map or a flow chart for each section of ratios, and then get an accountability buddy, so a parent, a friend, a partner, somebody in the coffee shop, and say, excuse me, would you mind just quizzing me on these ratios? And I'm going to try and relay them and recall them to you and teach them what they are and what they mean. And it sounds really random. You're thinking, Alex, you do that? Yes, I do, and have and did. It works very well. If you can teach other people, you will learn. But also what you'll find, actually, is that people really do want to help you. So, you know, maybe get an accountability buddy, a friend, a partner, somebody who'll be able to, within the ACCA community, maybe you're really lucky that you have other ACCA students, and get them to hold you accountable and study with them. Things like ratios are a really good way of condensing information on small pages and using that as a revision technique. Unfortunately, far too many candidates ignore the scenario provided in the question and the acquisition and disposal of a subsidiary and producing vague and generic answers. This is a big problem because you need to carry on and expand your answers. Just throwing in a number and full stopping it, or just ignoring the scenario, and it's really simple to use the scenario. So if the scenario is called Look North Mate Company, use the name of the company in your answer. If the director is called Tahir, use the name of the director, or if your client is called Helen, refer to Helen when you're producing your answer. It shows a little element of sort of professionalism, but also it shows that you're engaging with the scenario, and it helps to show that you can actually get more marks, or ensure that you get more marks in your exam. So I'm just going to do a little summary of section C, and as I do that, we're coming up to about sort of 15 minutes left, which is brilliant because we've got a few other things to cover and we've got questions as well. I'm just going to see if anything else has popped up in the question panel so I can see. Yeah, amazing, fantastic. I can look at these right at the end, so I'll look at them very shortly. As I said, do keep things coming in. We've got Q&A coming up very shortly. So here's a nice summary of section C. Take instructions from the requirement itself. So one of the great things about, exam technique and learning ACCA exam technique is to read the requirement first, even before the scenario, so even before the case, even whether it's section A, B, C, and you should carry on doing that throughout the qualification, because it leads to you doing something called active reading, whether you consciously or subconsciously engage with this. If you know you are looking for a false or true statement, when you are reading the statements, you can rule one or two out. If you know you are dealing with International Accounting Standard 38, you know that therefore you are dealing with intangible assets, and so on and so forth. So it directs your mind whilst reading the case to then figure out what's relevant, what's not relevant, what's poignant, and maybe what's not so interesting. Make sure you attempt all of the requirements. Don't just do the ones you like. Why would you do that? You're not going to score as many marks. I illustrated earlier, it's a lot easier to get 50 out of 100 than it is to get 50 out of 70. So make sure you have a go at everything. And therefore, that actually leads quite nicely into a few of the other things here. So one of them being show you're working. So if you're asked, whilst producing a calculation for goodwill or, an impairment, you want to be able to show your working because you'll gain marks for that. If you do not show your own working, you don't get any marks for your own figure rule. Even if you've got it incorrect, you can still get carried through marks. Know your ratios, whether that's creating punchy notes, whether that's getting an accountability buddy for the general studies of all of your qualification, but particularly, each exam. Make sure you know your ratios, because that's a common theme that we've seen throughout the exams report. Read the question carefully. Avoid generic comments. Explain and expand why. And I often use the term "so what," and I did this earlier. We have a return on capital employed of 17%. So what does that mean? Is it good? Is it bad? Why is it this? How has that changed from last year? What's the impact on us in terms of, our budgets and maybe what our projections were? And how does this compare to our competitors, for example? Use the scenario. They don't write them for the fun of it. Well, maybe they do, because it's, it's quite fun, but ultimately they're writing the scenario to help you and create and construct a case within your exam. So you want to use this effectively. So do refer to the name of the case, the people in the case, whilst you're writing up your answer. Headings, small paragraphs and structure make it easier for people to mark and make it easier for you to get marks, because you are succinctly and professionally working through the requirements. And do not repeat yourself, because you don't get the same marks for the same comment made, but with slightly different words. So if you've commented on profitability already and you've used return on capital employed, move on to another investment appraisal technique if you so wish to, move on to another ratio, move on to another comment, expand, keep going. Lastly, and certainly not least, practice, 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 practice. I mean, I could keep going. There are so many questions available, and I'll talk about resources now actually, because it could be quite useful, and I'll show you the links in a minute. But there are so many free resources on our ACCA website, past questions, specimen exams. We've also got exam kits, which we have approved by our approved content providers. Your learning partners all around the world and in the region have fantastic practice kits. You can use them. They are exam standard, and you will be able to get used to the structure of the exam, build your exam technique. And just like anything, just like when you go to the gym, play a sport, get really good at eating, many of us have done that over lockdown, you get better and better at it. Some general tips and techniques. Exam technique is so important. These are computer-based exams. You should really be practicing on the practice platform. Make sure that you go onto the ACCA website, use the ACCA resources. There are also, as I say, approved learning partners who have the compatibility of our platforms, and therefore continuing to practice on a computer-based exam platform is extremely important. You get used to functionality, you get used to the word processing and the spreadsheets, which is extremely important, because that's the way in which the world has moved, and therefore qualification has moved with it, and therefore it makes it much more, well, actually, to some extent, it makes it much more realistic. So where can you find the resources? Well, it's already in the chat panel. You can go onto our Study Support Resources website. There are a host of freely available resources prepared by industry experts for you to support you on your ACCA journey to ensure that you have exam success. Not only are there these wonderful things, the examiner's reports, there's also examining team guidance and articles and so on and so forth. So if you go in here, these are written by the examining team. Everything I've told you today has come very much from the examining team guidance as well as the examiner's reports. Go back and have a read of the last at least 4 to 6. You want to make sure that you've got a good depth of understanding of each examiner's report, and you can spot the commonalities, the common mistakes as you go along. Technical articles, you'll be able to find these on our website. I believe that will also be in the chat panel now as well. And there are a host of technical articles, all very relevant. When I've taught this paper and I've taught, many different exams, I do stress the need for technical articles to be read by students. If you take, for instance, this examiner's report and you consider one of the recurring themes, there was partly in relation to goodwill. So if you look a third down there, the use of fair value in goodwill calculations. There's also another one in terms of, just far to the right, where's that gone? Impairment of goodwill. If you want to scrub up on goodwill, read those 2 technical articles. They're written by the examiner and the examining team for you as students to understand how they view goodwill. And there's a host of other ones, property, plant and equipment, of intangible, fixed assets. One of the hot topics of the last few years, International Financial Reporting Standards 16 on leases. So there's a lot of technical articles here. Maybe sometimes students feel a little bit overwhelmed by the fact there is a lot of resources. But the key thing is that you've got so much support there. You want to try and make sure that you're directed by actually an approved learning partner, because these guys can help you with their own resources, their own experts, people who make a living out of teaching students how to pass these exams and supporting them on their journey. So they are the experts in finance reporting and all the different exams. So then they can tell you, these are the good technical articles. So do take note, enlist an approved learning partner. Facts of the matter is that you are higher likelihood of passing your exam if you do work with an approved learning partner. One of the other resources that I just skimmed through is the Virtual Learning Centre, and I do think this is a fantastic resource for many students, given that it has English and mathematics tests on here. So I do appreciate that many students throughout the region, English is an additional language. So if you do need to improve or look at the standard of your English, please use the Virtual Learning Centre and do some listening and reading tests. Also, we are a very inclusive qualification, and I find it mesmerizing that still the assertion around the industry is that you've got to be really good at maths to be an accountant. Well, you do have to have some core competency in mathematics. So if you want to test your abilities in maths and you want to scrub up on your math skills, go check out our Virtual Learning Centre and use the math tests. There's also getting ready for your next ACCA exam, where here you can go on and do some knowledge checks, quizzes, and understand whether you understand the fundamentals before you get stuck into finance reporting or audit insurance, or even the next level of qualification, which is the strategic professional level. So just before I get into questions, I just want to summarize, and we've got 5 or 10 minutes now for questions, so hopefully I've timed this quite nicely. You want to ensure that you go through the examiner's comments each time you prepare for a new exam. So whether that's financial reporting, tax, audit and assurance, FR, FM, or all of the other exams, they all have comments from the examiner. Make sure you read the examiner's reports. Understand the points and incorporate them into your practice early to enhance your scores. Make use of the study support resource on the ACCA website, which I've just talked you through, particularly the study planner. That's great, plan, prepare and pass. Guides and specimen exams, and practice for your exam by using the ACCA practice tests, as well as the approved content in such as exam kits. So this leads me very nicely with a spare bit of time to talk about questions or field some of your questions. Now, I've already seen a few questions come in, so I'm going to have a look in the question box just for 1 second, so bear with me, and then I'll try and address some questions. We've also had some sent in earlier as well, so I'll try and fit them in the next sort of 5 or 10 minutes. So I'll put myself on mute. I'll just have a quick look now. Brilliant. Right, so there's a few people asking, about the exam questions. So again, you can go onto our ACCA website. You can go into the study support resources, select your exam. So in this instance, financial reporting. There's CBE practice tests, CBE specimen tests, and there's also a host of available resources from our approved content providers that you can get in touch with them via our approved learning partner directory as well. Thank you so much. If you do need help with any of your English or mathematics, please use the Virtual Learning Centre. It's a fantastic, freely available resource. Hannah, thank you ever so much. What other resources are there? Hopefully I've answered your questions so far. But as I said, just to summarise, we've got examiners reports, we've got examining team guidance, we've got videos, we've got finance reporting on a single page, which is a nice sort of succinct document, maybe good for revision. We've got plenty of practice tests, examiners and technical articles. There's so much on there. Please make sure you make use of it. Brilliant. Yes, the recording will be shared with everybody after this session. So if you are watching it back, well, you've already got it. But if you are watching it live, you will receive an email with the recording on it. It will also be shared on our social medias. So make sure actually that you connect with us on our social media. So on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, as well as what else have we got? We've got them all. Yeah, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube. So please do connect with us there as well. Brilliant. So we've got some interesting, so we've had challenges. Yeah, obviously, COVID-19's had a significant challenge as well. And what we found actually is across the board that many students now, given that there was exams cancelled across the region and around the world, particularly in June, is that they've decided to maybe take up an extra exam for September. They've already started. So for those who'd started in June, they'd continue to study over that longer period, which has actually set them up very well for September. So there's been lots of different ways and lots of agility shown in the market through different learning partners. Hopefully you've seen that, and as well as the ACCA education teams around the world. Please do have a look at the other resources available, like the videos and recordings. I'm sure you'll find them very useful. And the study plan is a great way of actually breaking down your study plan over the next 6 weeks towards September. So best of luck for everyone with that exam. I know we've got a couple of questions that came in earlier. I'll just have a quick look and see if we've got a little bit of time for them as well. So what have we got here? Right, bear with me 1 second. Helen, if you could please, we've got 1 or 2 questions that I'd like to just go through with the class or the class with the audience. So I think there was one about international accounting standards, if that's all right.
Hi everyone. Yes. First question is, do I need to memorize all the international accounting standards such as IAS 38 intangible assets?
Thank you, Helen. It's a really common question actually that we get on all sort of accounting papers. And the hard and fast answer to that is no, you don't. You do not need to remember every single international accounting standard. It's useful and it will come natural to retain some of the knowledge, like International Accounting Standard 1 on the preparation of financial statements and things like that. But ultimately, you're not going to be asked, what is IAS 7, and know that it's about cash flows. You will, learn these, they'll become second nature, but the actual sort of core thing within the exams is to understand the application of the accounting standards rather than the strict numbers themselves. There was a couple of other questions as well, Helen. What, 1 or 2 before we wrap this up? I think there was one on
yes.
paper pairings.
I've actually got 2. So in section C, how can I expand my written answer?
And the other one?
Is I am intending to take more than 1 exam this sitting. What other exam paper goes well with FR?
Brilliant. Right, I'll take them one by one. Thank you very much, Helen. And I think that'll sort of do us with questions. I think maybe we've got 1 or 2 more coming in. So section C, the expansion of a sort of requirement. So when you have or are asked to perform some form of ratio analysis or create a set of profit and loss or an extract from a cash flow, the comment section is all about the expansion. So I talked earlier about the so what, and I use the so what approach consistently throughout the qualification, so it works well in all the other papers. So when you do write out, a statement of a number or a figure, you then need, the most important part actually is the so what does that mean? So having an understanding of how to calculate is one thing, but it's more important to say so what and why, and how that implicates. So is it good performance? Is it bad? How does it relate to competitors? How does it compare to prior year? And maybe some reasons why. Why has profit gone up? Oh, well, our revenues increased as a result of our marketing strategies. Or why have our costs gone down? Well, our overheads have reduced as a result of cost-cutting measures by finding better resources or even, changing our supply chain. So it's all about that higher level thinking. In regards to paper pairings, I know many students have done this. There isn't necessarily a right answer for this. It does vary quite a lot, and I just want to advocate that one of the key advantages of the ACCA qualification is the flexibility of it. It has an awful lot of flexibility as a qualification that allows you as students to pick and choose which exams to do, when and how. If you are doing financial reporting in September, you may well have chose to pick audit and assurance, which does work well with FR, because you are going to learn about the international accounting standards and how to prepare certain financial statements and ratios and you know, understand the different frameworks. But then in the audit and assurance exam, you're then going to learn how to, or show that you know how to audit them, assurance engagements, and so on and so forth. So they do work quite well together. Another paper that works quite well with financial reporting is the law paper. And what we've seen over the last few months is, given that the law paper is actually an on-demand exam, students can study the law paper and another exam, for example, financial reporting, pass the FR exam online because they can pick and choose when to do that exam, and then lead quite nicely into a September sitting for financial reporting. So I think we've overrun only slightly, which is absolutely fine. And I've had an absolute pleasure doing this. I can't believe it's been an hour already, sincerely. I hope you found this useful. If I was just to say, you know, a couple of closing remarks, I think the, you know, the approach to study, the plan, the prepare, and the pass is extremely important. You want to make sure that you are using, you know, the ACCA freely available resources and follow the examiner's reports to ensure that you understand what students have done well and what areas of weakness have happened through patterns over the last 4 to 6 sittings. Thank you very much. Best of luck with your upcoming exam in September if that's what you're doing, and all the best if you do need anything. Please get in touch. Our contact details are on screen now. Take care. Bye-bye.